Hi, I'm Lauren Fraumeni, and I'm going to be doing my project on the poet Rosanna Deerchild. Rosanna Deerchild's early life. Rosanna Deerchild has a vivid memory of the day she discovered the public library in Thompson, Manitoba, where she grew up. At home, Rosanna was faced with an alcoholic and abusive stepfather, and when she went to school, she got bullied for being Cree. She considered the library her salvation. Her favorite novels were always sci-fi and adult fiction, until one day she discovered the poetry section, specifically E. Pauline Johnson's book of poetry. After reading that book, she wondered to herself if she could write anything like that. Rosanna Deerchild's present life. Rosanna Deerchild is the host of the broadcast Unreserved on CBC Radio 1. She has been broadcasting for almost 20 years, and she is also an award-winning Cree author/poet. Rosanna has been featured on APTN, Global News, and many Indigenous newspapers. How did Rosanna find out her mother's story? So for the longest time, Rosanna didn't know her mother went to a residential school. She was in class one day in high school where the teacher was talking about the history in Canada, and residential schools was one of the points. He also took attendance another day, and when he called Rosanna's name, he stopped and said, "I know who you are. I went to residential school with your mother." Rosanna was very confused because her mother hadn't once talked about residential schools or even brought up any points about it at home. It was still many years later that her mom ever shared any stories to Rosanna. Her mother kept shutting down every time that Rosanna asked her any questions. Instead, she realized if she asked her how she was doing, or about her diabetes, or anything personal, that she would feel closer with her and eventually open up, which she did, slowly, cautiously, and very painfully. Rosanna's relation to residential schools. Rosanna has a poetry collection called Calling Down the Sky, which is where she bears witness to her mother's experience. In addition to telling the story through the collection strengthens the connection between mom and daughter. She learns about all the terrible, short and long-term traumas that still impact the children's lives today, and all the traumas that were experienced in the residential schools. She also talks about both women's resiliency. The collection explains in amazing detail about the thousands of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children that were placed in the schools against their parents' wishes and their own will. Many of these children were forbidden to speak their own language and practice their own culture. The relationship to the novella. The two brothers call the pale teacher Fishbelly, or sometimes Suckerbelly. They don't say it to his face because he's strong and he smells like what the color yellow or maybe brown smells like. And he has a room in the basement that scares the life from us. Boyden 1. In Rosanna's poem called On the First Day, which is in the same collection, she explains how the students would call the nuns Crow Nun because of how scary they could be. She once had her head smacked against the wall until it bled. That relates to the novella Wenjack because the boys call the teacher Fishbelly, since he also shows scary traits like the basement. These relate to one another because it shows the fear that Rosanna's mom encountered and the fear that the boys encountered from that one person in the residential school. It makes you think of everything else they went through and how scared they must have been. And then this is just my bibliography.